Hi, I'm Paige Henry, the owner of Regal Financial. We proudly support the YWCA Dayton's Voices Against Violence because we know the YW plays a pivotal role in our community. The session you're about to watch outlines the disparities that survivors living in rural communities face. More than 25% of women in small, rural, and isolated areas live more than 40 miles from the closest domestic violence program. This is compared with less than 1% of women living in urban areas. For almost 2 decades, YWCA Dayton has operated the only domestic violence shelter and 24/7 crisis hotline in rural Preble County, Ohio. Please join me in making a gift to ensure this critical work continues by going to ywcadayton.org/donate.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first afternoon session. My name's Emily. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm the Rural Prevention Educator here at YWCA Dayton. You may or may not be aware that along with our work in Montgomery County, YWCA Dayton has been committing to serving rural communities for over a decade, operating the Domestic Violence Shelter and Rape Crisis Center in Preble County, and this year adding Home Share Preble, a transitional housing facility. So we're super excited about that. This morning, I have the privilege to introduce our speaker joining us to discuss the intersection of domestic violence in rural communities. But before I do that, I want to thank Regal Financial, our sponsor for this entire event, for returning as a presenting sponsor for the second year. Now moving on to our speaker. Sonia D. Ferencik works to increase awareness of how lived experiences of exposure to a batterer as a parent impacts the lives of children, teens, and their parents. Her approach is individual, survivor-focused, intertwined with an understanding of the complexities of trauma responses and how batterers manipulate relationships with their children, their intimate partner, and with helpers. Sonia's work centers in creating trauma-informed programming by enhancing advocates' intervention skills and responses, and by supporting helpers with secondary traumatic exposure. She possesses over 30 years of working in domestic violence shelters, community-based group work, and advocacy. She's an advanced certified trauma practitioner from Star Commonwealth and a registered advocate with senior standing. And she works at Ohio Domestic Violence Network as the Youth Advocacy and Trauma-Informed Services Coordinator. She is the co-author of the Ohio Domestic Violence Network's Trauma-Informed Approaches, Promising Practices and Protocols for Ohio Domestic Violence Programs, and the Ohio Children's Trust Fund's Breaking the Cycle Manual. She grew up in rural southeastern Ohio in the foothills of Appalachia, with family still there. Without further ado, Sonia Ferencik.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Excuse me. I haven't talked out loud this morning. I am going to share my screen, which will take just a moment. I'm really happy to be with everyone today. Still have to share this. This is the human side of doing Zoom webinars. We're getting used to it, but it's still different. So yes, thanks for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here. From the Dayton Y. I'm really pleased, as it says, to be a part of your day and coming to you from ODVN. I am going to ask Emily and Marshall, I believe, to just check me on time, because when I'm going to manage it, but sometimes talking, it feels like, you don't talk that long and it's been 30 minutes. So, and when the Zoom screen is up, I can't really see the chat box. So I'm I'm needing help that way. So right now, I really want, as you're joining and a part of today, just to take a breath and just give respect to the awareness of the work that we do and that you're here. And just taking a moment to, access in a trauma-informed approach way our prefrontal cortex, because most likely you've been running and doing things between breaks. So just taking a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And again, in through your nose and out through your mouth. And last, again, awareness of breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. That simple on purpose breathing, where you have that awareness, is actually a really good skill set and just practice to do as a helper in the work when we serve others. It causes our the vagus nerve that runs through our body to allow our blood pressure to sort of balance and our heart rate to go down. So it's really important. And I also really, as I'm talking to you, want to talk with you about your self-care. Sometimes this information can cause upset. And so just to pick your word or your practice right now, if something kind of causes overwhelm, you can do tapping, you can move and do rhythm and rocking, something to bring you back towards listening while respecting your experience. So as Emily shared, I'm coming from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, and just a quick moment of we're a state coalition for Ohio domestic violence programs. We're a resource for people in Ohio. We have a vast reach. We do guidance, which is technical support or supporting programs and allied helpers with situations and questions that you might have. There's policy work. We support the 75 programs in Ohio in all of our 88 counties. There's legal assistance, supporting youth who are survivors. We have a linking systems of care project, prevention, engaging men. We do trainings, and there's a housing program now. And, so that's just a quick overview of ODVN. You can go to our website to find more out and to download any resources, including this one that you might, that might help you in your work. I wanted to, honestly, I was going to play Martina McBride's song Independence Day, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a song about a survivor of domestic violence in a small town. And so I'm starting with the map of our state of Ohio. I've been, fortunate to grow up in southeastern Ohio, where up in the hills, and so home and the rural experience is so much a part of my life. And even though I'm not living there presently, I'm always called back home through memories and through experiences, and it serves in my work at Ohio Domestic Violence Network, because Ohio is such a vast community. I've lived in Columbus, I've lived and worked in Cleveland, so very rural, urban experiences. And we have to have an appreciation and a mindset for people that are living in the areas that are smaller towns. And even when saying smaller towns, I grew up with a small town, 4-way stop in the center, and that's it. There's a lot of there's homes and stuff around, but there's no red lights. There's no fast food restaurants, things like that. But if I traveled to Belmont County, I grew up in Monroe, or down on the river, crossing the river to West Virginia, or going to Wheeling, my access to might be like 30 minutes, 45 an hour away by car. But then I was around some larger cities, in my opinion. People in urban areas would say, no, that's not a large city. And so my point is, it's all, some of it's perspective, but definitely some of it is geography. and how we grow up. This is a map of the domestic violence programs, both communal residential like shelter and also culturally specific, and some programs that are non-residential. So I wanted to start showing you that Ohio, you know, it's important to show that we have many short-term services available. And just like Emily described, even transitional housing, which is a longer term services provided to survivors and children who are also surviving domestic violence. So there's shelter, there's hotline or helplines. There's the National Domestic Violence Helpline, if people have the awareness of it, to call that. There's text to chat in Ohio that people in you can, if you have a phone, you can text for hope to 741-741, and you reach a trained counselor within 5 minutes. They'll contact you. So there are some services available to folks. There's counseling services, and now in the time of this pandemic, where increase in even telehealth services that actually fit rural communities well. But there's safety precautions that that come about when you're a survivor of domestic violence using telehealth, because if the perpetrator is still in the background living in the home, then there's access. The safety aspects have to be considered when we're accessing services that way. There's basic criminal justice services. The counseling services sometimes could be through like groups like Al-Anon, support groups, groups in churches and things that are working on giving people an opportunity to have a space to feel supported and share. And then our domestic violence programs do support groups and communities. There's legal advocacy through domestic violence and sexual violence programs. And then ODVN has direct service links in legal and relocation assistance programs. And presently, during this time of COVID, we have a hotel assistance program that can help domestic violence survivors. So I wanted to start with that because sometimes, I'm going to dig into some of the issues now, and it's important to mention what we have. Now we're going to look at what in rural areas, the gaps in services, and critically how this informs our ways of making space for survivors, creating awareness, and such. So here's the thing, though. Before doing that, I really want to talk to you about the work of Jill Davies, which is in looking at batter-generated risk and life-generated risks, and how strategic rural resistance occurs all the time for a survivor of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. I'm expecting that today you talked about the definition of domestic violence, but I'm going to give you a different door to walk through in thinking about this. So challenging your growth and setting the stage. So I like to do like thought bubbles or index cards in this case, where as allied professionals and helpers and agencies, we have to consider in our training and in our awareness how also, we think about survivors as individuals, but we also need to be thinking about survivors who are also parenting child survivors in the midst of domestic violence. That is when a batter is imposing their rules and tactics and coercion in the lives of a family. Even after this family might have left the batterer and moved on somewhere, there's likely a connection with visitation that's often court ordered. And so survivors and child survivors need our, it's required that we have an awareness in how to support them in navigating the safety issues when kids have to visit the batterer's parent. So domestic violence, if there's a family, it's impacting the whole family. And batterers employ parenting as part of victimizing the child or the children, and also victimizing their intimate partner. And it's always displayed in harshness, rigid rules, and manipulation and twisting of love and abuse. So, you know, within this, we're looking at rural and Appalachian areas in Ohio. And we talked about, you know, how Ohio is just widely different. And, you know, cities, small towns, ridges, back roads, and all the areas in between. And so these truths inform our work and how we serve survivors, both child and adult, and what they need. And culture, access to services, distressed areas, cuts in funding, as even as late as 2 weeks ago, we all received over $20 million cuts. I might be actually stating that incorrectly. There's a huge loss in VOCA funding for domestic violence programs and sexual assault programs that's impacting right now the services that we can provide and the amount of staff that can provide those services. There's also issues in housing and transportation. And then we're going to talk about the barriers that intersect that are for survivors of domestic violence being rural, but also being exposed and connected to a batterer. And so concerns for survivors in domestic violence is, again, geography. That means, you know, do I drive a car? Do I have a car? Do I have access? Is there buses? Some cities have buses, some, you know, will never have that. So being able to get places. I have aunts that never learned to drive a car. So, you know, and then my mom did. So there's differences in families. There can be high unemployment. I know these aren't things that are new when you're thinking about this, but they're important to point out because they show up in the life-generated risks of a survivor of domestic violence. And there can be high levels of poverty through generations. And also presently, people experiencing poverty because of industry loss and job losses due to, you know, essential businesses and such. And so existing programs have long suffered as a result of the limited tax base in rural areas, which fund, access to services and even creating them. There's, you know, other factors unique to domestic violence survivors. So there's cultural traditions that often socialize women to be primary caregivers of their children. And sometimes this results in the caregiver not working outside the home or working inconsistently outside the home. This has ties to the financial aspects of how a batterer uses money. And then we know that pay is often less for women, and there's a lack of health insurance, and then the transportation. And admittedly, I left off care of children. If both people are working, you know, is there a sharing of how children are taken care of? And I can inform you that when a batterer as parent is involved, there's not a co-parenting experience going on between the two adults. There's often expectations that are just put upon the person victimized to do the caretaking of everyone, with the batterer being at the front of that caretaking. survivors have talked about the need to protect their children and the difficulties that they've encountered when trying to keep the kids away from the abuser. Some of this is tied into cultural and religious, ways that we're raised. And again, sometimes it's manifested through our court systems where kids have to go and they're left not as protected. And then there's the existence of poverty in distressed areas in Ohio, with the shifting landscape and changes in jobs. So isolation is core in the experience of survivors of domestic violence. And so how that plays out in our real lives is that batterers, partners want to create isolation between the person in their life to their friends, their family, their sisters, their brothers, their circle of people that care about them. If they have employment, making that difficult to get to, and making jobs, showing up at jobs, calling jobs, people lose jobs because of that. So isolation is a core experience in a victim's life. And when you compound that with the idea that in rural Ohio, family is very centered culturally to many of us. And so if I'm isolated because the perpetrator in my life is creating such a risk for me to reach out to my family, and the other side of that coin is, if I grew up in domestic violence, there might be this expectation that I made my bed, I should lie in it, so to speak. To use one of those old sayings, you gotta see, you gotta see it through. You have kids, all those kind of those deep rooted sort of beliefs about keeping a family together and not airing your dirty laundry. I don't like those terms, but those are terms that I know that we work with and live with in our lives. And so, we have to be open to knowing that type of isolation by the batterer, and then the aspects of how reaching out for help can just be met with not anybody hearing us, is a piece of how then it serves even more. And then we reach out to church, or we reach out to employers, or we reach out to criminal justice protection, and hear more of how it is the survivor's fault. That can make the isolation become even more extreme. And so our role in this is learning ways to break down that isolation by creating a serve and return, and building relationships, finding out ways to talk about things without using the words domestic violence or battering, but saying, are you safe at home right now? I noticed you weren't able to keep a couple of appointments. I'm wondering if that's because it wasn't safe for you to keep those appointments while someone else is kind of watching or something. There's ways in trauma-informed approaches to talk to survivors. It's kind of in code, but someone who's experiencing domestic violence that had to cancel 3 appointments because they can't get out, or they can't use the phone, or they didn't show up, to have an allied professional say to them, hey, I get it. I've worked with people who aren't safe in their home. Might this be happening? And let's try a 4th time, instead of us on the other side of this going, you know what? They missed 4 appointments. They don't want to do this. If they did, they'd be showing up. We have to create opportunities for survivors to keep reaching out. We also know that housing and employment can be, just the availability of being able to move somewhere else isn't always, it's not a reasonable expectation. And so how do we plan for safety that way? Where I grew up, there were no apartments to move to. you owned land, and you might be able to rent land. So that barrier to leaving is a part of surviving. And oftentimes, surviving is complying because you're trying to live through the experience. I just want to check my time. So there's a perceived ability to seek help and not seek help that's rooted in small town culture and values. And as you look at this, we often look at, we grow up oftentimes and live in the same areas. And so we're going to know a lot of times the folks that are all around us. And there's a strong belief in family unit, traditional, oftentimes views of male-female roles. And there's a strong sense of secrecy. If the word gets out about the abuse, there's fear, shame about being rejected and not being believed. A lot of these experiences in small town culture are mirror survivors that live in urban areas too, with respect to people, in circles of others. However, sometimes in small towns, I will say that one survivor that I worked with shared that, our small town papers, there's still some that exist. They put the police reports in the paper. And so when a sheriff or a law enforcement officer is called to the scene, that's going to show up, and then all the neighbors and people in the town are going to know. And so oftentimes, there's a reluctance to involve criminal justice response because of this, because that puts the survivor at risk even more, because now the abuser is shamed in the community. And that's difficult. It's difficult for people to navigate that. So we're looking at patterns and coercive behaviors. They're driven by physical, sexual, and psychological attacks, but money is used. And this happens to adults and adolescents in their intimate partners. And as I mentioned, children and teens that are exposed to a person who is battering is also experiencing trauma responses, and living and trying to learn and navigate and safety plan. This is from the Duluth Project out of Minnesota. We adapted it for our trauma-informed care manual to be more colorful, but you can access this resource on our website if you look under downloadable resources, or you can request a copy that we can mail to you. So, as you look at these tactics and the dynamics of abuse, we want to overlay it with some universal rules of a batterer. And I'm going to read through these because this sets the stage for growing our awareness. So Barbara Hart is out of Pennsylvania, and she did this work, and it really sealed my understanding of how to grow my awareness in working with survivors. This is really important when we're working with people in rural areas, because they're experiencing these type of rules in their family. So a batterer expects that you don't leave this relationship unless they are through with you. And those words are tactic. There's tactics in those rules. You can't leave unless I tell you you can leave, or I'm through with you. There's evidence in that word "through with you" that there's a finality, a lethality. I get to decide when your life matters and when it doesn't. You can't tell anybody about my violence or my coercive controls. Important to know, because if you can't tell anyone about this, when well-intentioned people are knocking at the door, calling on the phone to say, "Hey, are you all right?" Or "I noticed that you have bruises," or "I noticed that you just seem upset," or you're covering for him or them, survivors aren't going to likely be able to tell you that, because there's a risk to them exposing the violence in their home, and the risk is to them and their children and their property. And next, batters believe that they have a sense of entitlement to their intimate partner's obedience, service, their affection, their loyalty, fidelity, and their undivided attention. That's a lot. I oftentimes do a 4-hour presentation just on this. So I know that I'm kind of going over this in a fast-paced manner, but this is deep. This is setting up all of the coercive tactics and setting the stage for this is how you serve me in this relationship. You choose not to, you decide that you aren't going to do it, then there's a cost to your safety, emotionally and physically. There's a cost to your life, and there's a cost to children in our relationship. And this is the one that really upends everything. When Barbara Hart did this work with batters and survivors, the last one is the thing that throws it all, and the world gets turned upside down, because batters get to decide which rules matter, when they matter, if they're critical, and changing them all the time. So that's the thing when survivors are saying to you, I walk on eggshells. I'm damned if I do. I'm damned if I don't. It doesn't matter what I do. It's always not enough. This is why, because of the belief systems and the rules and the harshness that their intimate partner sets up. And when you're not able to have structure and consistency and expectations in a relationship, then you're always on high alert. That's a trauma response. It's a whole body experience. But it's also, served by the abuser in the relationship, changing it all the time and twisting it. And so each batter, these are general rules, but each batterer is going to have their own set of tactics and rules. How this informs our work is to have knowledge and to understand it, and then to create space for the survivor to share if they're always changing and navigating different expectations. There's ways to use this information to talk with someone about what their experience is. A quick example of that is when I work in shelter or on hotline or out in the community, I'll say, do you guys have, like, in your relationship, do you have just understandings of how you get along, or are there rules that you have to live by? That's a trauma-informed trust talk question that says, as an advocate, I get that you might not be okay and that you live by a set of rules. And for a survivor, it might create a sense of trust for them to go, oh, maybe this person might know something, maybe I'm going to risk talking. And there's always this expectation that you don't talk about it, which makes our work more complex. So there's rulemaking and reinforcement. And I just want to overview this again, just so it helps to understand that the batterer is always the one changing the rules and deciding the scope and the detail. And survivors are fighting back. And when I use the word fighting back, I'm not just describing physically sometimes fighting back, but emotionally fighting back, navigating their own independence and their own sense of self, what I want in a relationship, what I don't want, and speaking up. And it's when they speak up or say, no, not this time, that a batter has to up the ante and shut the survivor down. And that can be emotionally, that can be hurting their dog, that can be upsetting the kids. There can be all these tactics that are employed to keep her liberty or their liberty from being realized. And I mean that emotionally and physically. So Jill Davies talks about batter-generated risk and life-generated risk. And we're going to go over that on the next slide. What I want to also talk with you about is the realization that complying with someone who's abusing you is not acceptance of the abuse. Sometimes we live with this idea that she or they must like it or they'd leave. And that's not true. We're wired in our bodies to survive a violent or powerlessness experience, and we're going to do what we need to do to get through that. We might fight back, we might freeze and numb, or we might comply to survive. And so this creates that toxic stress and that chronic stress that makes it a whole body experience. Again, this is a 3 or 8 hour type of training, but it's enough for you to begin to like get curious, if you're not already, about how toxic stress and trauma impact the life of a survivor, because that informs our work. And, you know, in rural Ohio or in small towns, we grow up with sometimes that work ethic or that ethic of that value system of you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you do it, you know. My grandpa had farms and grew up in the or had his farms, and you know, and I know this is sounding like old, but you know, they survived the Great Depression, and those generational historical lessons and traumas show up in the families and the survivors that we're working with today. So all this kind of in a complex way informs our interactions with people today. So I'd invite you to learn more about trauma and trauma reactions, and not only for adult survivors, but for child and teen survivors, because they're always going to be scanning for what's going to happen next. These are 3 resources, and I'm going to wind this down because I know that we're entering the question and answer phase. But I like to always give people resources, and I know that we're going to send this PowerPoint out to folks. So the batterer is always the one deciding who's in charge, and that's them. And so Jill Davies talks about risk to survivors that are batter generated. That's the individual tactics, the harm, the use of children, the stalking, the strangling, the brain injury, the menacing, the preventing someone to go to work, going to work, taking all the money. That's the emotional harm. That's the things that the batterer creates in the life of the survivor and the person being victimized. Life-generated risks are about, and this is where this overlays or really sets in the stage of rural, serving people in rural areas, because this is where we want to consider geography and access. And so life-generated risks are about financial limitations. Is there a job? Here's how you plug in. Did people just lose their job on the river because the plant shut down? When you lose money, stress goes up. Battering, we're seeing an increase across Ohio in the severity of domestic violence during people's loss of income right now. There's physical challenges. That's being born or in life, having lost my hearing, brain injury, not being able to see, having a stroke, and not being able to use, all of my body the way I used to. Those kind of challenges create barriers for survivors getting out, and they're life-generated risks. On top of the fact that batters often use tactics within those physical challenges, the existence of racism in our systems and in survivors who are Black and Brown and Indigenous having access to services. Home and location. Do you have a place to go, or is this the only place? Inadequate social institutional responses, and we're, in the midst of really looking at that right now. But this has existed forever in our country, so we have to consider that when we're working with survivors, and the aspects of survivors' lives to which they have little or no control, which is the batterer. So there's a report that we did in, as I wrap up, I just want to, if you Google Ohio, rural Appalachia, domestic violence, there's a report that comes up from OOCJS, that actually it was kind of funny that I was involved in that, where we at ODVN did a focus groups in 3 of the counties in Ohio, and also had some folks in the neighboring counties that were survivors. And there's a lot of information, even though that report came out in like 2004, 2005, which is dated. When I went through it and read again, it still fits a lot of what we're seeing with the influences and levels of support and gaps in services and the traditions that that are about, you know, family matters and the discouraging of victims to seek help. One of the complications that arises is barriers and that belief that what goes on stays in the family, which parallels with what a batterer's rules are. You don't tell anybody. And the fear and the shame and the life risk to seeking help. So as I'm ending, I know there's so much more that could be said about this. Just one of the most important things that we can do, steps that we can take, is actually creating a what is called a serve and return with the survivor, with someone that we're talking with an individual, and just giving them the chance to get to know you, because a lot in rural America, we don't talk about a lot of stuff all the time. And, you know, and knowing that we might have to learn to trust you a few times before we begin to share. And I'm generalizing that, but that is based in some of the types of traditions that we have, and in the ways that we're raised. And so, you know, creating confidence and being silent with someone and letting them have time to speak, and most likely going through a different door of where you're asking about how's your family, and does your family live around you, and what changes have you seen? Like talking about life first and what it's like is a way to build that rapport that can then lead to talking and providing some resources to a survivor who may or may not tell you that they're experiencing domestic violence. Sometimes it's around, what are your concerns for your children? And what are your hopes for your children? What are the strengths that you have in your family and your parenting with your child? When you're protecting them, what are you most concerned about? Those are ways to ask questions that can get through to survivors. So with that, I feel like that was so fast, but I hope that there were some nuggets in there for people.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. I think, you know, like all of us in this work, when you become passionate about something and spend time learning, you want to share everything, and it's almost impossible to pick and choose. How do I fill 25 or 30 minutes with all of this information? But you did a wonderful job of it. So thank you for that. I have a few things that I want to share. And while I do that, I want to invite our attendees. If you have any questions that popped up during the presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. We've not had a very inquisitive crowd today, but I think that's just because all of our presenters have been so thorough with their information, and it's been really great. So while you put those questions in the chat, if you desire to do so, I just want to share 2 things here. First, if you need resources, please call our hotline at 222-SAFE. If you're a provider, community member who wants to get involved with the YW, with what you do or with what we do, or partnering in some way, feel free to email us at info@ywcadayton.org. And this is a informational event and an advocacy focused event, but it's also a fundraiser. And in a normal non-COVID year, this is our 2nd largest fundraiser of the year, and a critical piece of some of those funds that come in to support our shelter and domestic violence services. And as Sonia mentioned, we saw anywhere from like 35 to 45% cuts in what is for many DV agencies in Ohio and across the country, the largest funder. And so at this time, in the midst of COVID and the midst of those cuts, your donations are critical, and we appreciate you. You can make those donations here at ywcadayton.org/VAV-donate, or throughout the year, just at ywca.org/donate. If you're connected with a Dayton Foundation, you can certainly make a donation through that. And additionally, if you have a company match with the company that you work for, we'd be happy to work with you in whatever way is needed to maximize that gift. We got a message here from Leah that says, not a question, but thank you for this virtual event. The presentations and all of them today have been very informative and has been easy for me to participate in with my work schedule, as I'm usually unable to participate in person. Well, thank you, Leah. We're glad you were able to join us. And the last thing I wanted to mention here before we sign off is, and I'm sorry I don't have a slide for it, but Sonia mentioned one of the threats that is often faced by survivors and victims of domestic violence is that their animals are threatened by the abuser. And so our largest Preble County focused fundraiser of the year is called Purple Paws, Pets Against Domestic Violence. And that event is going on right now. And it's a pet focused event, but still raising very important funds to support our shelter in Preble County. So you can also check that out at ywcadayton.org/Purple Paws, and we'd love for you to participate in that event. All that being said, I didn't see any other chats come through or anything in the Q&A. So Sonia, it looks like you did your job, and we're complete in your information, and we so appreciate it. We're thankful to you. We're also thankful for Regal Financial for sponsoring this entire event and making that happen, as well as to all of our panelists. Last but not least, we have our next session at 3 p.m. In just about an hour and 15 minutes. And that session is going to be with a representative from the National Alliance to End Homelessness and another representative from ODVN, focusing on the intersections of DV and housing and homelessness. So we hope you will join us for that. Oh, one more chat coming through here.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, okay. So Sonia, again, thank you. Panel or attendees, thank you. We hope to see you at our next session.